The first shot rang out just as the stagecoach rattled into Mineral Point, Wisconsin, sending Josephine Gentry ducking beneath the window, her heart hammering against her ribs like a frightened rabbit. She'd come all this way to marry a stranger in 1876, and now gunfire welcomed her to her new life. Bitter tears stung her eyes as the driver shouted something unintelligible, the horses whinnying in protest as the coach jerked to a halt. "Just some drunken cowboys celebrating," the elderly woman beside her explained, patting Josephine's trembling hand. "Nothing to worry about, dear." But Josephine worried about everything these days. Ever since her father had died and left her with nothing but debts, and the unwanted attention of his business partner, a man 30 years her senior with wandering hands and a cruel smile, she'd been desperate for escape. Becoming a mail-order bride had seemed her only option, yet now, as the stagecoach door swung open revealing the dusty main street of Mineral Point, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. "Miss Gentry," a deep voice called from outside. Josephine flinched, drawing back from the door. The memory of her father's business partner forcing himself upon her, his meaty hands bruising her wrists as she fought him off, was still fresh. That night had been the final straw, the reason she'd fled Boston with nothing but a single trunk and desperate prayers. "Miss Gentry, are you aboard?" The voice called again, more gently this time. The elderly woman beside her gave her an encouraging nudge. "That'll be your intended, dear. Best not keep him waiting." With trembling fingers, Josephine adjusted her bonnet and smoothed her travel-worn dress. She'd written to Vincent Eastwood for 3 months before accepting his proposal. His letters had been kind, respectful, speaking of his cattle ranch outside town and his desire for a partner, not just a housekeeper or bedmate. But letters could lie. Men could lie. And she'd been lied to before. Taking a deep breath, Josephine stepped out of the stagecoach, squinting in the bright afternoon sunlight. The man standing before her was tall, broad-shouldered, with a weathered face and kind eyes the color of a summer storm. His hat was in his hands, dusty boots firmly planted in the dirt road, and a patient expression on his face that didn't waver when she visibly recoiled from his outstretched hand. "Miss Gentry," he said, dropping his hand to his side without comment. "I'm Vincent Eastwood. Welcome to Mineral Point." Another shot rang out down the street and Josephine jumped, nearly losing her balance on the stagecoach step. Vincent didn't touch her, but he moved closer, positioning himself between her and the commotion. "Just the Calloway boys," he explained, voice low and steady. "Sheriff will settle them down soon enough." "Mr. Eastwood," she managed, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. Thank you for meeting me." His smile was gentle, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "Folks call me Vince, and it's my pleasure." He gestured toward the hotel across the street. "I've arranged a room for you at Mrs. Hollister's boarding house. Thought you might want to rest after your journey before we discuss our arrangement further." Relief flooded through her. He wasn't insisting she accompany him immediately to his ranch. He wasn't demanding anything at all. "Thank you," she whispered, genuine gratitude in her voice. "Your trunk?" he asked, keeping a respectful distance. She nodded toward the back of the stagecoach. "The small one with the blue ribbon." Vincent retrieved her trunk without difficulty, carrying it as if it weighed nothing at all. Josephine followed him across the street, keeping several paces between them, her eyes darting nervously at every loud noise or sudden movement. The town was busier than she'd expected, with wagons rumbling past and cowboys lounging outside the saloon, their curious gazes making her skin crawl. Mrs. Hollister's boarding house was a tidy 2-story building with lace curtains and a small garden out front, an oasis of gentility in the rough-hewn town. The proprietress, A plump woman with silver-streaked hair and sharp eyes greeted them at the door. "So this is the bride, Mrs. Hollister said, looking Josephine up and down with undisguised curiosity. "Skinny little thing, ain't she, Vince? We'll have to fatten you up, girl." "Mrs. Hollister," Vincent said, a note of warning in his voice. "Miss Gentry has had a long journey." The older woman sniffed but nodded. "Rooms ready upstairs, first door on the right. Supper's at 6. Don't be late or you'll go hungry." "I've arranged for a hot bath to be sent up," Vincent told Josephine, setting her trunk down in the foyer. "And Mrs. Hollister's roast beef is the best in the territory." Josephine clutched her reticule to her chest, unsure what to say. This man, her future husband, was nothing like she'd expected. Where was the rough demand, the proprietary hand at her back, the expectation that their vows would be exchanged immediately, regardless of her comfort? When did you want to? She couldn't finish the sentence, her throat closing around the words. Vincent seemed to understand. "There's no rush, Miss Gentry. I thought perhaps we could meet tomorrow for breakfast. Talk things through properly." His eyes, gray like thunderclouds gathering on the horizon, were kind but not pitying. "You have choices here, choices." The word hung in the air between them like a lifeline. Josephine hadn't felt she had choices in so long. Breakfast would be acceptable, she managed. He nodded, replacing his hat. 8 o'clock, 8 o'clock, she agreed. Vincent stepped back, giving her space. "Until tomorrow, then, Miss Gentry." He tipped his hat and was gone, boots echoing on the wooden porch steps. Mrs. Hollister clucked her tongue. "That man's patience would put a saint to shame," she muttered, then turned to Josephine. "Well, come along then. I'll show you to your room." As promised, a hot bath was delivered, and Josephine sank into it gratefully, washing away the dust and fatigue of her journey. Alone in the small but clean room, she allowed herself to think about Vincent Eastwood. His letters hadn't mentioned how tall he was, how his presence seemed to fill a room without being threatening. They hadn't described the gentleness in his eyes, or the careful way he kept his distance, reading her fear without comment or judgment. Perhaps, just perhaps, she hadn't made a terrible mistake after all. Morning dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the lace curtains of Josephine's room at the boarding house. She'd slept better than expected, though her dreams had been troubled memories of hands grabbing, restraining, mixed with the unfamiliar face of Vincent Eastwood watching from a distance, neither helping nor hindering. She dressed carefully in her best day dress, a modest blue cotton with white piping that brought out the color of her eyes. Her blonde hair, freshly washed the night before, she braided and coiled at the nape of her neck. The face that stared back at her from the small mirror was pale but composed. When she descended to the dining room at precisely 8 o'clock, Vincent was already there, seated at a corner table with his back to the wall, a position that allowed him to see everyone who entered. He stood when he saw her, that same gentle smile softening his features. "Good morning, Miss Gentry. I trust you slept well." "Well enough, thank you," she replied, taking the chair furthest from him at the small table. A serving girl brought coffee and plates heaped with eggs, bacon, and fresh biscuits. The familiar domestic scene, breakfast with a gentleman, seemed surreal after the upheaval of recent months. Josephine picked at her food, stomach knotted with anxiety. "I thought perhaps," Vincent said after they'd eaten in somewhat awkward silence, "that I might show you around town today. Help you get your bearings." Josephine set down her fork. "Mr. Eastwood, Vince, please." "Mr. Eastwood," she repeated firmly. "I believe we should discuss our arrangement before anything else." His eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. "Fair enough." She took a deep breath. "Your letters indicated you were seeking a wife. I responded because I needed security." The word tasted bitter on her tongue. "However, I feel I should be honest. I am not comfortable with men. I have my reasons." Vincent nodded slowly. "I suspected as much. The way you flinch when anyone comes near you, how you position yourself near exits." His perception startled her. "Miss Gentry, I meant what I wrote in my letters. I'm looking for a partner, not just someone to warm my bed or cook my meals. But you do expect marital relations." The bluntness of her question brought heat to her cheeks, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. To his credit, Vincent didn't look away. "Eventually, I'd hope for a normal marriage in all respects. But I'm not an animal, Miss Gentry. I won't force myself on an unwilling woman, wife or not." "And if I never become willing?" The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Vincent took a sip of his coffee before answering. "Then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. For now, I'm proposing a modified arrangement. You come to the ranch, have your own room, help with the household duties as you're able. We get to know each other properly. After 3 months, if you wish to leave, I'll provide you with enough funds to establish yourself elsewhere." Josephine stared at him, searching for the trap. "And what do you get from this arrangement?" "Companionship. Someone to build a life with if you decide to stay." He set down his cup. "I've been alone a long time, Miss Gentry. I'm not getting any younger, and running a ranch by yourself is a lonely business." It was more generous than she dared hope for, and that made her suspicious. Most men wouldn't be so patient. "I'm not most men." He said it simply, a statement of fact rather than boasting. Josephine studied him, from the strong lines of his face to the calloused hands that spoke of honest work. He was handsome in a rugged way, perhaps 35 to her 22 years, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often. 3 months, she said finally. "With my own room and the freedom to leave if I choose." Vincent nodded. "You have my word." "Then I accept your proposal, Mr. Eastwood." "Vince," he corrected gently. The smallest smile touched her lips. "Vince." After breakfast, true to his word, Vincent showed her around Mineral Point. The town had grown from a lead mining settlement, he explained as they walked down the main street, keeping a respectful distance between them. Now it was a thriving community with a mix of miners, farmers, and ranchers from the surrounding countryside. Josephine observed everything with cautious interest. The general store with its barrels of crackers and bolts of fabric. The milliner's shop where fashions from the East were displayed in the window, several seasons behind but still eagerly sought by local women. The blacksmith's forge where a burly man hammered red-hot iron, nodding to Vincent as they passed. The schoolhouse at the edge of town, quiet now for the summer months. "And that's the church where Reverend Peterson preaches." Vincent pointed to a white clapboard building with a modest steeple. "Services on Sundays with a social afterward." "You attend?" Josephine asked, curious about this man who would be her husband. Vincent smiled. "Every Sunday I'm in town. The Reverend's wife makes peach cobbler for the social that's worth getting up early for." The easy way he spoke of community and routine soothed something in Josephine. This was a man with roots, with connections to the place he lived. Not a drifter or an opportunist. As they continued their tour, several people greeted Vincent by name, their curious gazes sliding to Josephine. He introduced her simply as Miss Gentry, newly arrived from Boston, offering no further explanation. She appreciated his discretion. Near noon, they paused outside the telegraph office. "I need to send a message to my foreman," Vincent explained. "Would you like to wait here, or perhaps visit the general store? Mrs. Wilson carries some fine fabrics you might be interested in." The idea of being alone among strangers made Josephine tense, but she refused to show fear. "I'll wait here, thank you." Vincent nodded and disappeared inside. Josephine stood awkwardly on the boardwalk, watching the bustling activity of the town. A group of cowboys emerged from the saloon across the street, laughing loudly, and she shrank back against the wall of the telegraph office, heart racing. One of the men noticed her, elbowing his companion and pointing in her direction. Josephine froze as they crossed the street toward her, their spurs jingling with each step. "Well now, what have we here?" The taller of the two men grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Ain't seen you in town before, pretty lady." "I'm waiting for someone," Josephine said, her voice barely audible. "Waiting for someone," she says. The second man laughed, stepping closer. "Maybe you'd rather wait with us. We could show you a real good time." Josephine pressed herself harder against the wall, panic rising in her throat. "Please leave me alone." "Come now, don't be unfriendly." The telegraph office door swung open and Vincent stepped out, his expression darkening as he took in the scene. "Is there a problem here, boys?" His voice was deceptively calm, but something in his stance made the cowboys take a step back. "No problem, Eastwood," the taller one said quickly. "Just being neighborly to the lady. Miss Gentry doesn't need your kind of neighborliness." Vincent moved to stand beside Josephine, not touching her but close enough that she felt protected. "I suggest you move along." The men exchanged glances, then tipped their hats mockingly before sauntering away. Vincent turned to Josephine, concern evident in his eyes. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though her hands were shaking. "I'm fine, thank you." "I shouldn't have left you alone," he said, genuine regret in his voice. "That was thoughtless of me." "You couldn't have known," she replied, touched by his concern. Vincent glanced at the sky. "It's nearly noon. Would you like to have lunch at the hotel before we head back to Mrs. Hollister's? The ride to the ranch is about 2 hours, and I thought we might leave tomorrow morning, give you another night in town to prepare." The thoughtfulness of his planning, giving her time, not rushing her, continued to surprise Josephine. "Lunch would be nice," she agreed. As they walked toward the hotel, Vincent kept himself between Josephine and the street, a subtle protective gesture she didn't miss. Inside, they were seated at a quiet table near the window, and Vincent ordered for both of them after consulting her preferences. "Tell me about your ranch," Josephine requested as they waited for their food. It was easier to keep him talking than to answer questions about her own past. Vincent's face lit up at the topic. "It's about 10 miles outside town, in a valley with good grazing land and a creek running through it. My father staked the claim back in '46, started with just a few head of cattle and a one-room cabin. Now we run about 500 head and the house has 6 rooms, plus a bunkhouse for the hands. How many workers do you have?" The idea of being surrounded by men made her stomach clench. 4 full-time hands, plus extra help during roundup and branding season, Vincent answered, reading her concern. "Good men, all of them. They live in the bunkhouse, which is a fair distance from the main house. You needn't worry about unwanted attention." Their food arrived, hearty stew with fresh bread, and Josephine found herself actually hungry for the first time in days. As they ate, Vincent continued describing the ranch, speaking of the vegetable garden his mother had started years ago that had fallen into disrepair after her passing, the orchard of apple trees just beginning to bear fruit, the mare he'd been saving for his wife to ride. "Of course," he added quickly, seeing her expression, "there's no obligation for you to take on any duties you're not comfortable with. I manage just fine on my own." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Josephine said, slightly defensive. "In Boston, I kept house for my father after my mother died. I can cook and clean and mend." Vincent smiled. "I never doubted your capabilities, Miss Gentry. I simply meant that I don't expect you to arrive and immediately take charge of a household you don't know. There will be time to adjust. Time." Again, he was offering her the one thing she needed most: patience, space to breathe, to recover, to decide if she could trust him. After lunch, Vincent escorted her back to Mrs. Hollister's, where he left her with a promise to return the following morning at 9 o'clock. "Pack what you'll need for daily life," he advised. "We can always return to town if you need anything else." That evening, as Josephine carefully folded her few belongings into her trunk, Mrs. Hollister knocked at her door with a cup of chamomile tea. "Thought you might need this to help you sleep," the older woman said, setting the cup on the bedside table. "Big day tomorrow." "Thank you," Josephine replied, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Mrs. Hollister, may I ask you something?" "Of course, child." "Mr. Eastwood. What kind of man is he, truly? You seem to know him well." Mrs. Hollister's expression softened. "Vince Eastwood is the finest man in this county, maybe in this whole territory. His father was a hard man and his mother died young, but somehow Vince grew up gentle despite it all. Never raises his voice, never draws his gun lest there's no other choice. Folks respect him." She paused, studying Josephine's face. "He'll be patient with you, girl. Whatever's got you jumping at shadows, he won't make it worse." The simple assurance brought unexpected tears to Josephine's eyes, which she quickly blinked away. "Thank you." Mrs. Hollister patted her shoulder, the first physical contact Josephine had allowed in months. "Drink your tea and rest. Morning comes early in these parts." Dawn broke crisp and clear the next day, and Josephine was ready well before Vincent arrived with his wagon. Mrs. Hollister pressed a small package of cookies into her hands as she left. "For the journey," she said with a wink. Vincent loaded her trunk into the back of the wagon, then helped Josephine onto the seat, careful not to touch her more than necessary. The wagon was well sprung, with a padded seat and a canopy to provide shade. "Comfortable?" he asked, climbing up beside her. Josephine nodded, clutching her reticule in her lap, suddenly nervous about leaving the relative safety of town for the isolation of the ranch. What if Vincent was different once they were alone? What if his patience was just an act? As if sensing her thoughts, Vincent spoke quietly as he guided the team of horses onto the road leading out of town. "Miss Gentry, I want to assure you again that you're safe with me. My foreman, Mr. Jenkins, and his wife live in a small cabin near the main house. Mrs. Jenkins helps with the housekeeping when needed. You won't be alone with me unless you choose to be." The knot in Josephine's chest loosened slightly. "Thank you for telling me." The journey to the ranch took them through rolling hills dotted with wildflowers, past small farms and open range where cattle grazed in the distance. Vincent pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the area's history: the old trapper's cabin now abandoned, the creek where local children fished in summer, the ridge where he'd once tracked a mountain lion that had been preying on calves. "There it is," he said finally, as they crested a hill. Eastwood Ranch. Below them stretched a verdant valley, bisected by a winding creek lined with cottonwood trees. The ranch house sat on a gentle rise, surrounded by outbuildings: a barn, corrals, what must be the bunkhouse. Smoke rose from the chimney of the main house, a welcoming sight against the backdrop of distant mountains. "It's beautiful," Josephine said, genuine appreciation in her voice. After the crowded tenements of Boston, the open space and clean air seemed almost unreal. Vincent's smile was proud. "Wait until you see it in spring, when the wildflowers carpet the hillsides." Spring. The casual mention of a future season, months away, reminded Josephine of the terms of their arrangement: 3 months to decide whether to stay or go. 3 months to determine if Vincent Eastwood was truly the gentleman he appeared to be. As they approached the ranch, a middle-aged couple emerged from the house. The man was tall and weathered, with a thick mustache and kind eyes. The woman beside him was plump and rosy-cheeked, her gray-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun. "Miss Gentry, this is Thomas Jenkins, my foreman, and his wife, Martha." Vincent introduced them as he helped Josephine down from the wagon. "Welcome to Eastwood Ranch, Miss Gentry," Martha Jenkins said warmly, though she made no move to embrace Josephine, seeming to sense her wariness of physical contact. "I've prepared the blue room for you, and there's fresh bread for supper." "Thank you," Josephine replied, mustering a small smile. Thomas Jenkins tipped his hat. "Pleasure to meet you, miss. Boss has been talking about your arrival for weeks." Vincent coughed, a hint of color rising in his tanned cheeks. "Jenkins, help me with Miss Gentry's trunk, would you?" As the men unloaded her belongings, Martha guided Josephine into the house. The ranch house was larger than Josephine had expected, built of solid timber with a wraparound porch. Inside, the main room was spacious and well lit, with a stone fireplace at one end and comfortable, if somewhat worn, furniture arranged invitingly. "The kitchen's through here," Martha explained, leading the way. "And upstairs are the bedrooms. Yours is at the end of the hall with its own washroom. Mr. Eastwood had it added special just last month." The thoughtfulness of the gesture private space, her own sanctuary, brought a lump to Josephine's throat. "That was kind of him." Martha's eyes twinkled. "He's a good man, Miss Gentry. Better than most. Now, would you like to rest before supper, or would you prefer a tour of the house?" "A tour, please," Josephine decided. Better to know her surroundings, all possible exits and hiding places. The habit was ingrained now after months of looking over her shoulder. Martha showed her through the house, the dining room with its polished oak table, the small study lined with bookshelves, the back porch that overlooked a neglected garden. Upstairs, there were 4 bedrooms, the largest obviously Vincent's, with a desk covered in papers and a quilt in earth tones on the wide bed. Josephine's room was at the opposite end of the hall, painted a soft blue with white curtains at the windows and a simple brass bed. "I'll leave you to settle in," Martha said, pausing at the door. "Supper's at 6. Don't worry about helping today, there'll be plenty of time for that once you've rested." Alone in her new room, Josephine sat on the edge of the bed, running her hands over the crisp cotton quilt. The room was clean and bright, with a small bookshelf containing several novels and a rocking chair by the window that overlooked the valley. On the dresser stood a pitcher and bowl of blue and white china, and beside it, unexpectedly, a small vase of wildflowers. The simple gesture brought tears to her eyes. Someone Vincent or Martha had thought to welcome her with flowers. It had been so long since anyone had shown her such consideration. Unpacking her meager belongings didn't take long. Josephine changed from her traveling dress to a simpler one of lavender cotton, washed her face and hands in the porcelain basin, and stood by the window watching the activity in the ranch yard below. Men moved between the barn and corrals. A dog raced after a thrown stick. Chickens pecked in the dust near a small coop. It was so different from Boston, from the cramped apartment she'd shared with her father, from the whispers of neighbors and the looming threat of her father's business partner once the funeral was over. Here, the air smelled of grass and leather and wood smoke, not coal and too many bodies pressed together. At 6 o'clock precisely, a soft knock at her door announced supper. Josephine took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and prepared to face her first meal in what might become her permanent home. The dining room was warmly lit by oil lamps, the table set with simple but clean dishes. Vincent stood when she entered, pulling out a chair for her with that same careful distance he always maintained. "I hope you found your room satisfactory," he said once they were seated. "It's lovely," Josephine replied honestly. "Thank you for the private washroom, that was thoughtful." Martha served a hearty meal of roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread, with apple pie for dessert. The conversation flowed more easily than Josephine had expected, with Vincent asking about her journey west and sharing stories of recent ranch activities. He never pressed when she gave vague answers about her life in Boston, seeming to understand her reluctance to discuss her past. After supper, Vincent suggested they sit on the front porch to enjoy the evening air. The sun was setting behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Josephine sat in a rocking chair, Vincent in another several feet away, respecting her need for space. "Tomorrow," he said as darkness fell and the first stars appeared, "I thought I might show you around the ranch if you're not too tired. The apple orchard is just beginning to bear fruit, and there's a spot by the creek where the wildflowers grow thick as carpet." "I'd like that," Josephine replied, surprising herself with her sincerity. Vincent smiled, the expression gentle in the gathering dusk. "Then it's settled. For now, you must be exhausted. Don't feel you need to rise early. Breakfast is informal here. Martha usually keeps coffee hot and biscuits warm until mid-morning." As they stood to go inside, Vincent paused, his expression serious. "Miss Gentry, Josephine, if I may, I want you to know that your comfort here is my primary concern. If there's anything you need, anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask." The genuine care in his voice touched something deep within Josephine, a place she'd thought had withered and died in the months following her father's death and her subsequent flight from Boston. "Thank you, Vincent," she said softly, using his full name for the first time. I appreciate your patience." His smile was worth the effort it had taken her to express gratitude. "Good night, Josephine. Sleep well." That night, in the unfamiliar bed with the sounds of the countryside replacing the urban noises she was accustomed to, Josephine slept better than she had in months, without a single nightmare to disturb her rest. The days that followed established a rhythm unlike anything Josephine had known before. Mornings began with breakfast at the large kitchen table, usually with Vincent and the Jenkins joining her. Then, while Vincent attended to ranch business, Martha would show Josephine another aspect of running the household: the root cellar stocked with preserves, the chicken coop where fresh eggs waited to be gathered, the herb garden struggling to survive without regular attention. Mr. Eastwood's mother had quite the green thumb, Martha explained as they surveyed the overgrown garden beds. "Since she passed, it's been hard to keep up with everything." "I could help with this," Josephine offered hesitantly. The idea of nurturing something, of bringing order to the neglected space, appealed to her. Martha beamed. "That would be wonderful, dear. I've got my hands full with the cooking and cleaning." In the afternoons, Vincent would often find time to show Josephine more of the ranch: the creek where trout darted in the clear water, the stand of aspen trees that would turn golden in autumn, the gentle mare he'd bought specifically for a lady rider. "Her name is Daisy," he told Josephine as the horse nuzzled his hand for treats. "She's steady as they come. When you're ready, I thought you might like to learn to ride." The idea terrified and thrilled Josephine in equal measure. "Perhaps, in time." Vincent nodded, accepting her hesitation without question. "No rush. She's not going anywhere." Evenings were spent on the porch if the weather was fine, or by the fireplace if it turned cool. Vincent would read aloud, sometimes poetry or newspaper articles from back east, while Josephine mended clothing or worked on embroidery, a skill her mother had taught her long ago. Through it all, Vincent maintained a respectful distance, never crowding her, never demanding her attention or affection. If their hands accidentally brushed while passing a dish at dinner, he would apologize softly and move away. If he noticed her tense when one of the ranch hands approached unexpectedly, he would step between them, redirecting the conversation until she relaxed again. His patience was unlike anything Josephine had ever encountered in a man. Most men she'd known her father's business associates. The young men who'd courted her briefly before her father's death had expected immediate compliance with their wishes, whether spoken or unspoken. Vincent asked for nothing, offered everything, and waited. It was disconcerting and strangely liberating. 2 weeks after her arrival at Eastwood Ranch, Josephine was working in the garden, hands deep in the rich soil as she cleared weeds from around struggling herbs, when she heard footsteps approaching. She tensed, then relaxed when she recognized Vincent's distinctive tread, firm but never heavy, as if he was consciously trying not to startle her. "The garden's looking much improved," he commented, keeping several feet between them as he surveyed her work. Josephine sat back on her heels, pushing a strand of hair from her face with the back of her wrist. "The soil is good. With regular attention, I think it could be quite productive by next season." Next season. Again, that implicit acknowledgement that she might still be here months from now. Vincent smiled. "I've always liked the idea of fresh vegetables. My mother used to grow tomatoes that would make you weep. They were so sweet." "Tell me about her," Josephine requested impulsively. "Your mother." Vincent leaned against the garden fence, his expression softening with memory. "Elizabeth Eastwood was a force of nature. Came out here from Philadelphia as a bride, not much older than you. My father was a hard man to live with, demanding, quick to anger, though never violent," he added quickly, seeing Josephine's expression. Mother softened his rough edges, taught him patience. She loved books and music and growing things. "You take after her, I think," Josephine observed. Vincent looked startled, then pleased. "I hope so. She was the kindest person I've ever known." He straightened, gesturing toward the barn. "I came to tell you that I need to ride out to check on the north pasture. I'll be gone most of the afternoon. Will you be all right?" The genuine concern in his voice, without a hint of controlling possessiveness, warmed something inside Josephine. "I'll be fine. Martha and I are planning to bake bread this afternoon. Then I'll look forward to the smell of it when I return," Vincent said with a smile. He tipped his hat and walked toward the barn, leaving Josephine to her gardening. As she watched him go, Josephine realized with a start that she felt safe here, in this place, with this man. The constant vigilance, the fear that had been her companion for so long, had begun to ease, like muscles relaxing after being clenched too tightly for too long. It was a strange feeling, almost frightening in its unfamiliarity. That night at supper, Josephine found herself studying Vincent covertly as he discussed the condition of the cattle with Thomas Jenkins. His hands, strong and calloused from ranch work, moved expressively as he talked. The lamplight caught the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples, the laugh lines around his eyes. He was handsome, she realized with a jolt, in a quiet, steady way that grew more appealing the longer she looked. When he caught her watching him, he didn't smirk or make a suggestive comment as some men might have. Instead, his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, a silent acknowledgement of her attention that asked for nothing in return. Josephine looked away first, heat rising in her cheeks. Later, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the gathering darkness, Vincent broke the comfortable silence. "Josephine, there's something I've been meaning to discuss with you." Her stomach clenched with sudden anxiety. Here it comes, she thought. The demand, the expectation, the real reason he brought me here. "The harvest dance is coming up in town next weekend," he continued, oblivious to her inner turmoil. "It's a tradition in Mineral Point, been happening every September since before I was born. I usually attend, but I wanted to ask if you'd be comfortable going. There's no obligation, he added quickly. It's entirely your choice. Josephine blinked, her anxiety slowly receding. A dance, Vincent nodded. Nothing fancy, it's held in the town square. Folks bring food to share. There's music and dancing. It's a good way to meet people if you're interested. But if crowds still make you uncomfortable, I understand completely. The thoughtfulness of the offer, giving her the chance to socialize, but making it clear he wouldn't be offended if she declined, was so typical of Vincent that Josephine found herself smiling. I think, she said carefully, that I would like to go. The smile that lit up Vincent's face was worth the flutter of nervousness the idea of a public gathering still caused her. Wonderful. Martha can help you with a dress if you need anything special. I have a dress, Josephine assured him, thinking of the blue silk packed carefully in her trunk. She'd brought it on impulse, a remnant of her former life in Boston, though she doubted she'd ever have occasion to wear it again. As September progressed, the ranch settled into preparations for winter. Vincent and his men worked long hours bringing in the last of the hay, moving cattle to lower pastures, repairing fences and outbuildings before the first snow. Josephine found herself increasingly involved in the rhythm of ranch life, preserving the late summer vegetables, helping Martha prepare heartier meals for the men working outside, even learning to make soap with lye and rendered fat. A messy process that nonetheless gave her a sense of accomplishment. The morning of the harvest dance dawned clear and cool, with a hint of autumn crispness in the air. Josephine woke early, a mixture of excitement and trepidation fluttering in her stomach. This would be her first real public appearance as Vincent's fiancée, mail-order bride. Their arrangement remained undefined, existing in a limbo of mutual respect and cautious companionship. Martha helped her dress for the dance, exclaiming over the quality of the blue silk gown with its modest neckline and delicate lace trim. "You'll be the prettiest gal there," the older woman declared as she arranged Josephine's blonde hair in a becoming style, with soft curls framing her face. "Mr. Eastwood won't be able to take his eyes off you." Josephine blushed, but didn't contradict her. In truth, the idea of Vincent admiring her was no longer frightening. Over the past weeks, his consistent kindness, his unfailing respect for her boundaries, had begun to dismantle the walls she'd built around her heart. When she descended the stairs that evening, Vincent was waiting in the front hall, dressed in his Sunday best, a dark suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, his hair neatly combed, boots polished to a shine. The look of appreciation that crossed his face when he saw her made Josephine's heart skip a beat. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you," she replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "You're quite handsome yourself." The drive to town was pleasant, with the setting sun painting the landscape in warm hues. Vincent pointed out a family of deer grazing at the edge of the woods, a hawk circling lazily overhead. His easy conversation helped calm Josephine's nerves about the evening ahead. Mineral Point was transformed for the harvest dance. The town square was festooned with paper lanterns and autumn garlands, tables laden with food lined one side, and a small bandstand had been erected where several men with fiddles and a guitar were tuning their instruments. People of all ages milled about, greeting neighbors and friends, the women in their finest dresses, the men in suits or clean work clothes. As Vincent helped Josephine down from the wagon, several people approached to greet them. To her surprise, Josephine found she didn't flinch away from the introductions. With Vincent beside her, solid and reassuring without being possessive, she felt anchored, secure enough to shake hands and exchange pleasantries. "Vincent Eastwood, you old bachelor." A robust woman in a purple dress engulfed Vincent in an enthusiastic embrace. "And this must be the bride we've been hearing about." "Mrs. Peterson," Vincent said with a smile, extricating himself gently. "This is Josephine Gentry. Josephine, Mrs. Peterson is the Reverend's wife." "Delighted to meet you, my dear," Mrs. Peterson beamed, taking Josephine's hand in both of hers. "We've all been wondering when Vincent would bring you to town. Such a lovely couple you make." Before Josephine could respond to this assessment, the band struck up a lively tune, and couples began moving toward the cleared area that served as a dance floor. "Would you care for some punch?" Vincent offered, sensing Josephine's discomfort at being the center of attention. "Yes, please," she agreed gratefully. As Vincent went to fetch refreshments, Josephine found herself approached by several curious townswomen, all eager to meet the mysterious mail-order bride who had captured Vincent Eastwood's heart. Their questions were well-meant but probing, and Josephine found herself giving carefully edited answers about her journey west and her adjustment to ranch life. "And when's the wedding?" asked a particularly forthright young woman with red curls escaping from her bonnet. Josephine was saved from answering by Vincent's return with 2 cups of punch. "I see you've met Miss O'Connor," he said smoothly, handing Josephine her drink. "Her father runs the mercantile. We were just discussing wedding plans," Miss O'Connor said with a meaningful look at Vincent. "Were you?" Vincent replied mildly. "How interesting, since Josephine and I haven't discussed them ourselves yet." The gentle rebuke in his tone sent Miss O'Connor off with a flush in her cheeks. "Thank you," Josephine murmured as they moved away from the curious onlookers. Vincent's smile was understanding. Small towns run on gossip. Best to nip it in the bud when you can. As the evening progressed, Josephine found herself relaxing, even enjoying the festivities. The food was delicious, the music cheerful, and Vincent's steady presence beside her made the crowd less intimidating. He introduced her to people he thought she might like: the schoolteacher who shared her love of books, the doctor's wife who was known for her garden, the blacksmith's daughter who made beautiful quilts. When the band began playing a slow waltz, Vincent turned to her with a question in his eyes. "Would you care to dance? Only if you're comfortable, of course." The idea of being held, even in the formal frame of a waltz, would have sent Josephine into a panic a month ago. But now, looking at Vincent's kind face in the warm glow of the lanterns, she found herself nodding. "I'd like that." Vincent led her to the edge of the dance floor, then faced her, holding out his hand. "If at any point you want to stop, just say the word," he promised. Josephine placed her hand in his, feeling the warmth of his palm against hers, the gentle strength of his fingers as they closed around her own. His other hand came to rest lightly at her waist, maintaining a proper distance between them as they began to move to the music. At first, Josephine was stiff, hyper-aware of every point of contact between them. But as Vincent guided her smoothly around the dance floor, his movements predictable and gentle, she gradually relaxed. By the second circuit of the dance area, she found herself almost enjoying the sensation of being led by a partner who was so careful with her. "You dance very well," Vincent commented, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "My mother insisted on dancing lessons," Josephine replied, surprised by how easy it was to share this small piece of her past with him. "She said every proper Boston girl needed to know how to waltz." She was right, Vincent smiled. "Though I imagine Boston ballrooms are a far cry from our humble town square." "I prefer this," Josephine admitted. "In Boston, everything was about appearances, about making the right connections. Here, people seem to genuinely enjoy each other's company." As the music swelled, Vincent's hand tightened almost imperceptibly at her waist, drawing her a fraction closer. Josephine's breath caught, not with fear but with a strange, unfamiliar warmth that spread through her chest. When the dance ended, they remained standing close together for a moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then Vincent stepped back, releasing her hand with a gentle squeeze. "Thank you for the dance," he said, his voice slightly rougher than usual. Josephine nodded, unable to find words for the confusing emotions swirling within her. They made their way to the refreshment table, where Vincent was soon drawn into a conversation with the mayor about plans for improving the town's water supply. Josephine stood slightly apart, watching the dancers when Mrs. Peterson appeared at her side. "He's quite a man, our Vincent," the Reverend's wife commented, following Josephine's gaze to where Vincent stood, his tall figure easily visible in the crowd. "Yes, he is," Josephine agreed softly. "Mrs. Peterson gave her a shrewd look. "Not what you expected when you answered his advertisement, I'd wager." Josephine tensed slightly. "Is it that obvious I'm a mail-order bride?" The older woman patted her arm. "Only to those who know Vincent well. He's been alone too long, that one. Lost his mother young, and his father was a hard taskmaster. Never gave the boy much affection." She sighed. "Vincent's got a good heart, though, patient as the day is long. The right woman could be very happy with him." The implication was clear, and Josephine found herself wondering, not for the first time, if she could be that woman. Could she overcome her fear enough to be a true wife to Vincent? Did she even want to try? As the evening drew to a close, Vincent found her again, concern in his eyes. "You look tired. Are you ready to head home?" "Home." The word settled in Josephine's chest with unexpected weight. In just a month, she had come to think of Eastwood Ranch as home, a place of safety and belonging she hadn't experienced since her mother's death years ago. "Yes, I think so," she replied. The drive back to the ranch was quiet, both of them lost in thought. The night air had grown chilly, and Vincent draped a blanket over Josephine's shoulders, his fingers brushing her arm with a touch so light it might have been accidental. When they arrived at the ranch, the house was dark, the Jenkins having retired to their cabin. Vincent helped Josephine down from the wagon, then walked her to the door. "I enjoyed this evening," Josephine said, suddenly shy. Vincent's smile was gentle in the moonlight. "As did I. Thank you for accompanying me." They stood for a moment on the porch, the silence between them charged with unspoken possibilities. Then, moving slowly enough that she could have stepped away, Vincent reached out and took her hand, raising it to his lips for a brief, gentle kiss. "Good night, Josephine," he said softly, releasing her hand. "Good night, Vincent," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Inside, as she prepared for bed, Josephine's thoughts were in turmoil. The warmth of Vincent's lips on her hand lingered, as did the memory of dancing in his arms. For the first time since fleeing Boston, she found herself thinking of a future that included more than mere survival, a future with companionship, perhaps even love. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating. October arrived with crisp mornings and golden afternoons, the aspens turning to flame along the creek. Josephine settled deeper into life at Eastwood Ranch, finding satisfaction in small accomplishments: bread that rose perfectly, jam made from late berries, the garden beds cleared and prepared for spring planting. She began to venture farther from the house alone, walking to the creek or visiting the apple orchard where the last fruit waited to be harvested. Vincent continued his patient courtship, if it could be called that. He brought her wildflowers found on his rides, shared books from his modest library, listened attentively when she spoke of her day. Sometimes, when they sat on the porch in the evenings, he would tell stories of his childhood on the ranch, or of his brief time at a school back east before his father called him home to learn the cattle business. I always regretted not finishing my education, he admitted one evening as they watched the sunset paint the distant mountains. I'd hoped to study engineering. You could have left after your father passed, Josephine observed. Vincent shook his head. This land is in my blood. For all his faults, my father taught me to love it, to respect it. I couldn't abandon it. He glanced at her. But I've tried to keep learning in my own way, hence the books. Josephine smiled. I noticed your collection of poetry, not what one expects from a rancher. We're more than our occupations, Vincent replied, his eyes holding hers. Just as you are more than your past, whatever it might be. The gentle invitation to share hung in the air between them. Josephine looked away, watching a hawk circle lazily overhead. My past is difficult to speak of. I understand, Vincent said quietly. But if you ever want to talk about it, I'm here to listen. No judgment, no expectations. The simple offer, made without pressure, loosened something in Josephine's chest. Perhaps it was time to trust him with her story. Perhaps in sharing her past, she could begin to move beyond it. My father was a businessman in Boston, she began slowly, keeping her eyes on the distant horizon. Import-export mainly. My mother died when I was 16 and I kept house for him afterward. He wasn't an affectionate man, but he provided well, and we had a comfortable life. Vincent remained silent, giving her space to continue at her own pace. 2 years ago, he entered into a partnership with a man named Harold Wilson. Mr. Wilson was attentive to me in ways that made me uncomfortable. My father either didn't notice or didn't care. Josephine's hands twisted in her lap. When my father died suddenly last winter, leaving significant debts, Mr. Wilson offered to take care of me in exchange for, well, you can imagine. She heard Vincent's sharp intake of breath, but couldn't bring herself to look at him as she continued. I refused, of course, but he was persistent. One night he came to our house, drunk. He said since my father had left nothing but debts, I was effectively his property now. The memory of that night made her voice shake. He tried to force himself on me. I fought him off with a fireplace poker and fled to my neighbor's home. She helped me pack a few belongings and gave me money for a train ticket west. Josephine, Vincent's voice was tight with controlled anger. I am so sorry that happened to you. She risked a glance at him then, and what she saw in his face wasn't pity or disgust, but righteous fury on her behalf. I saw your advertisement in a newspaper, she continued. You seemed kind, respectful. I thought perhaps here, so far from Boston, I could start again, but I was still afraid. Of all men, really. Understandably so, Vincent said quietly. You've been more patient than I had any right to expect, Josephine admitted. Most men would have demanded their marital rights immediately or sent me back when I proved difficult. Vincent's expression softened. I'm not most men, remember, he said, echoing his words from their first breakfast together. And you're not difficult, Josephine, you're healing. That takes time, and I have plenty of it to give. The simple acceptance in his words, the complete lack of judgment or disappointment, brought tears to Josephine's eyes. Without thinking, she reached across the space between their chairs and took his hand. Vincent's surprise was evident, but he didn't pull away or attempt to take advantage of the gesture. His fingers curled gently around hers, warm and calloused and infinitely comforting. They sat in silence as darkness fell, holding hands like shy youngsters, both acutely aware of this small but significant shift in their relationship. The first snowfall came in early November, dusting the valley with white that gleamed in the morning sun. Josephine stood at the kitchen window, watching as Vincent and the ranch hands moved about their chores, their breath forming clouds in the crisp air. 2 months had passed since her arrival at Eastwood Ranch, 2 months of gradually opening herself to the possibility of a life here, with Vincent. In that time, She had changed in ways both subtle and profound. The constant fear that had been her companion for so long had receded, replaced by a tentative confidence. She no longer flinched when Vincent entered a room unexpectedly. She could tolerate the presence of the ranch hands without anxiety. She had even begun to ride Daisy, with Vincent walking beside her at first, then watching proudly as she guided the gentle mare around the corral on her own. And in the evenings, they often sat close together on the sofa before the fire, sometimes reading, sometimes talking, sometimes simply enjoying each other's companionable silence. Occasionally, Vincent would hold her hand, or she would rest her head briefly against his shoulder. Small intimacies, carefully offered and gratefully received. Martha Jenkins, observing these developments with barely concealed delight, had taken to making herself scarce in the evenings, retiring to the cabin she shared with Thomas after supper dishes were done. "Young folks need their privacy," she declared with a wink that made Josephine blush to the roots of her hair. As November progressed, preparations for Thanksgiving occupied the household. Vincent rode into town for supplies, returning with flour, sugar, dried fruit, and surprising Josephine fabric for a new dress. "I thought perhaps you might like something for the holiday," he explained, holding out the package of deep green wool. "Martha mentioned your blue silk might be too thin for the cold weather." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Josephine deeply. "It's beautiful," she said, running her fingers over the fine material. "Thank you." "There's something else," Vincent said, reaching into his coat pocket. He withdrew a small box, holding it out to her with uncharacteristic hesitation. "This belonged to my mother. I'd like you to have it." Josephine opened the box with trembling fingers to reveal a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. "Vincent, it's lovely, but I couldn't possibly, please," he interrupted gently. "She would have wanted you to have it. She always said it should go to the woman who brought life back to this house." His eyes held hers, sincere and hopeful. "You've done that, Josephine. Whether or not you decide to stay when our 3 months are up, you've brought warmth and light back to this place." Tears filled Josephine's eyes as she lifted the locket from its velvet nest. "Will you help me put it on?" Vincent moved behind her, taking the necklace with careful hands. Josephine lifted her hair, feeling the warmth of his breath on her neck as he fastened the clasp. His fingers brushed her skin, sending a shiver through her that had nothing to do with fear. "There," he said softly, stepping back. Josephine turned to face him, one hand touching the locket where it rested at the hollow of her throat. "Thank you," she whispered. They stood close together, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Slowly, giving her every chance to move away, Vincent raised his hand to cup her cheek. Josephine leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed for a brief moment. "Josephine," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "May I kiss you?" The question, so respectful of her boundaries even now, made her heart swell with affection for this patient, gentle man. "Yes," she breathed. Vincent bent his head, his lips meeting hers in a kiss so tender it brought fresh tears to her eyes. His hand remained at her cheek, his other arm loose at his side, giving her space, always giving her space. Josephine found herself wishing he would hold her closer. When he drew back, the look in his eyes, wonder mixed with restrained desire, made her breath catch. "I'm falling in love with you," Vincent confessed quietly. "I don't expect you to return my feelings. I just wanted you to know." Josephine's heart raced, not with fear but with a joy so intense it was almost painful. "I think," she said carefully, "that I'm falling in love with you too." The smile that illuminated Vincent's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Then I am a fortunate man indeed." Thanksgiving Day dawned clear and cold, with fresh snow blanketing the valley. Josephine rose early, eager to help Martha prepare the feast. In her new green wool dress, with Vincent's mother's locket at her throat, she felt more beautiful and confident than she had in years. The dining room table was extended to its full length, to accommodate not only Vincent and Josephine, but also the Jenkins, the 4 ranch hands, and the elderly widow from the neighboring homestead, who would otherwise have spent the holiday alone. Josephine had worried about being overwhelmed by so many people, but found instead that she enjoyed the bustling activity, the laughter and conversation that filled the house. Vincent carved the turkey with practiced skill, his expression proud as the guests praised Josephine and Martha's cooking. Later, as they all sat replete with food and contentment, Thomas Jenkins proposed a toast. "To Mr. Eastwood and Miss Gentry," he said, raising his glass of cider. "May your future together be as bright as this day." Josephine felt herself blushing as everyone turned to look at them, but she didn't shy away from their gazes or from Vincent's hand covering hers on the table. After the guests had departed and the Jenkins had retired to their cabin, Vincent and Josephine sat before the fire in the main room, a comfortable silence between them. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, soft flakes drifting past the windows. 3 months, Vincent said quietly, breaking the silence. Josephine looked at him questioningly. "You've been here 3 months today," he explained. "The time we agreed upon for you to decide whether to stay or go." Josephine hadn't realized the significance of the date, but now that Vincent mentioned it, she did a quick mental calculation. Yes, it had been exactly 3 months since she'd stepped off the stagecoach in Mineral Point, terrified and alone. "I remember our agreement," she said softly. Vincent nodded, his expression carefully neutral though his eyes betrayed his anxiety. "The offer still stands. If you wish to leave, I'll provide funds for you to establish yourself elsewhere." He swallowed hard. "But I hope you'll stay." Josephine considered him in the firelight, this good, patient man who had given her time to heal, space to grow, who had shown her what real respect and affection looked like. The man she had, against all odds, come to love. "Ask me to stay," she whispered. Vincent's eyes widened, hope dawning in their gray depths. He took her hands in his touch gentle but sure. "Josephine Gentry, will you stay here at Eastwood Ranch? Will you be my wife, not just in name but in truth? Will you build a life with me?" The certainty of her answer surprised even her. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." Joy transformed Vincent's face as he drew her into his arms, holding her close for the first time. Josephine went willingly, without fear, her head finding its place against his shoulder as if it had always belonged there. "I love you," Vincent murmured against her hair. "And I love you," Josephine replied, the words no longer frightening but freeing. When he kissed her this time, it was deeper, more confident, and Josephine responded with a passion that had been dormant for too long. His arms around her felt not like a trap but like safety, like coming home after a long, difficult journey. Later, much later, as they sat entwined before the dying fire, Josephine asked the question that had been on her mind. "When shall we be married? Properly, I mean." Vincent pressed a kiss to her temple. "Whenever you wish. Tomorrow, next week, next spring." "I'm in no hurry now that I know you're staying." Josephine considered this. "Before Christmas," she decided. "I'd like to begin the new year as your wife." "Then before Christmas it shall be," Vincent agreed, his voice warm with happiness. Snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the valley in pristine white, while inside, by the glowing embers of the fire, 2 people who had found each other against all odds planned their future together. The wedding took place the 2nd Saturday in December, in the white clapboard church in Mineral Point. Reverend Peterson performed the ceremony, his wife beaming from the front pew as if she'd personally arranged the match. The church was decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons for the Christmas season, filling the air with the scent of pine. Josephine wore her blue silk dress, with a white shawl Martha had crocheted as a wedding gift draped around her shoulders. Vincent's mother's locket gleamed at her throat, now containing a tiny daguerreotype of Vincent that she'd had taken when they visited town to obtain their marriage license. Vincent, standing tall and proud at the altar in a new suit, watched with undisguised adoration as Thomas Jenkins escorted Josephine down the aisle, the old foreman having agreed to give her away in the absence of any family. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Peterson began, his voice filling the small church where it seemed half the county had gathered to witness the union. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. When Vincent spoke his vows, his voice was clear and strong, his eyes never leaving Josephine's face. When it was her turn, Josephine was surprised to find her voice steady, her conviction absolute as she promised to love, honor, and cherish this man who had waited so patiently for her heart to heal. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Peterson declared with evident satisfaction. "Vincent, you may kiss your bride." The kiss they shared before the congregation was chaste but tender, a promise of deeper intimacies to come. When they turned to face their friends and neighbors as Mr. and Mrs. Eastwood for the first time, the cheers and applause made Josephine blush, but didn't diminish her joy. The celebration afterward at the town hall was festive and boisterous. There was dancing and feasting, toasts and well wishes, and if some of the older women wiped away tears at seeing the confirmed bachelor Vincent Eastwood finally wed, no one teased them for it. As evening approached, Vincent found Josephine sitting with Mrs. Peterson, watching the dancers. "Are you ready to go home, Mrs. Eastwood?" he asked, the new name sending a pleasant shiver through Josephine. She nodded, suddenly shy as she realized what returning home as his wife would mean. Vincent must have read her nervousness in her face, for he leaned close to whisper, "Nothing will happen that you don't want, Josephine. I've waited this long. I can wait longer if needed." The tenderness in his words, the continued respect for her feelings even now, filled Josephine with a rush of love so strong it took her breath away. "I'm ready," she assured him, and meant it in every sense. They said their goodbyes amid knowing smiles and good-natured teasing, then climbed into the wagon for the journey back to Eastwood Ranch. The night was clear and cold, stars scattered like diamonds across the black velvet sky. Vincent wrapped a fur blanket around Josephine, his arm remaining around her shoulders as he guided the horses with his other hand. The ranch house glowed with welcoming light when they arrived. Martha had left a fire burning in the main room, and on the kitchen table stood a bottle of champagne, a wedding gift from the mayor, with 2 glasses beside it. Vincent helped Josephine down from the wagon, but instead of letting her walk to the house, he swept her into his arms. "Tradition," he explained with a smile as he carried her across the threshold. Inside, he set her gently on her feet but kept his arms around her, looking down at her with an expression of such love and wonder that it brought tears to Josephine's eyes. "Welcome home, Mrs. Eastwood," he said softly. Josephine reached up to touch his face, marveling at how natural it felt now to initiate contact with him. "It feels like I've been home since the day I arrived," she admitted. "I just didn't realize it yet." Vincent bent to kiss her, a kiss deeper and more passionate than any they had shared before. Josephine responded eagerly, her arms twining around his neck, her body pressing closer to his. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he whispered, "more than I ever thought possible." "Show me," Josephine replied, surprising herself with her boldness. Vincent's eyes darkened with desire, but he searched her face carefully. "You're certain?" In answer, Josephine took his hand and led him toward the stairs, toward the master bedroom that would now be theirs to share. "I'm certain," she said. "I'm not afraid anymore." And she wasn't. Not of Vincent, not of intimacy, not of the future they would build together. The terrified young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach 3 months ago was gone, replaced by a woman who had found her courage, her strength, and her heart in the arms of a man who had waited patiently for her to heal. Later, much later, as they lay entwined beneath the quilts, Josephine's head pillowed on Vincent's chest, his fingers gently stroking her hair, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From fear to trust, from loneliness to love, from running away to finding home. "What are you thinking?" Vincent asked, his voice a rumble beneath her ear. Josephine smiled in the darkness. "I'm thinking that sometimes the things we fear most lead us to the places we most need to be." Vincent's arms tightened around her. "And are you where you need to be?" "Yes," Josephine said with absolute certainty. "I'm exactly where I belong." Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and silent in the winter night, blanketing the valley in pristine white. But inside the ranch house, warmth and love kept the cold at bay as two people who had found each other against all odds slept peacefully in each other's arms, secure in the knowledge that their journey together was just beginning. Spring came to Eastwood Ranch in a riot of wildflowers and birdsong. The creek, swollen with snowmelt, gurgled merrily through the valley, and new calves wobbled beside their mothers in the green pastures. In the garden Josephine had reclaimed, tender shoots pushed through the rich soil, promising summer bounty. Vincent found her there one April morning, kneeling in the dirt as she carefully transplanted seedlings started in the kitchen window weeks before. The sun glinted off her golden hair, loosely braided down her back, and the simple happiness in her face as she worked made his heart swell with love and gratitude. "Those tomatoes look promising," he commented, crouching beside her. Josephine smiled up at him, unafraid and welcoming in a way that still amazed him after all these months. "Your mother's variety. Mrs. Peterson had seeds saved from years ago." Vincent touched a tender green shoot gently. She would be pleased to see her garden thriving again. He paused, gathering his courage for what he needed to say. "Josephine, there's something I want to discuss with you." His serious tone made her look up sharply. "Is something wrong?" "No, nothing's wrong," he assured her quickly. "It's just, I've been thinking about the future, our future." Josephine sat back on her heels, giving him her full attention. "What about it?" Vincent took her soil-smudged hand in his. "I've been offered a position on the town council. It would mean spending more time in Mineral Point, being more involved in community affairs." "That's wonderful!" Josephine exclaimed. "You'd be excellent at it. You wouldn't mind. The additional responsibilities, the social obligations." Josephine's smile was understanding. "Vincent, I'm not that frightened girl who arrived on the stagecoach anymore. I can handle town meetings and social gatherings now." She squeezed his hand. "Besides, I'm proud of you. I want everyone to see what a fine man I married." The simple declaration, spoken without hesitation, filled Vincent with warmth. He leaned forward to kiss her, not caring about the dirt on her hands or the ranch hands who might be watching from the corral. "What was that for?" Josephine asked, laughing as they broke apart. "For being you," Vincent replied. "For how far you've come. For making me the happiest man in the territory." Josephine's expression softened. "You made it possible, Vincent. Your patience, your respect. You gave me the time and space to heal, to remember who I was before fear became my constant companion." "You did the hard work," he countered. "I just waited." "Well, I'm glad you did." Josephine stood, brushing dirt from her skirts. Now, shouldn't you be seeing to that broken fence in the north pasture? Thomas was looking for you earlier. Vincent rose, smiling at her practical shift in conversation. Yes, madam. Will you ride out with me later? The wildflowers along the ridge are at their peak. I'd like that, Josephine agreed. I'll pack a picnic. As Vincent walked toward the barn, he marveled at the transformation in their lives since that September day when Josephine had first arrived. The ranch itself seemed more alive. From the thriving garden to the newly painted trim on the house, to the sound of Josephine's laughter drifting through open windows. The lingering shadow of his father's stern presence had finally been banished. Replaced by a warmth and light Vincent had almost stopped believing possible. That afternoon, they rode side by side along the ridge overlooking the valley. Josephine confidently handling Daisy, no longer needing Vincent's reassurance or guidance. They picnicked among bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush, talking of town council matters and garden plans, and the new book Josephine had ordered from back east. As the sun began its descent toward the distant mountains, Vincent stretched out beside Josephine on the blanket they'd brought, his head in her lap as she read aloud from a volume of Wordsworth's poetry. Her voice, soft and expressive, mingled with the sounds of nature around them: birdsong, the rustle of grass in the spring breeze, the distant lowing of cattle. For I have learned to look on nature, Josephine read, not as in the hour of thoughtless youth, but hearing oftentimes the still, sad music of humanity. Vincent closed his eyes, content in a way he'd never imagined possible. This woman who had arrived in his life so unexpectedly, who had overcome such fear to build a new life with him, was the greatest blessing he could have asked for. Vincent, Josephine's voice interrupted his thoughts. She had stopped reading and was looking down at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Yes, love, I have something to tell you. She bit her lip, suddenly seeming nervous. Dr. Harrison confirmed it yesterday when I was in town. We're going to have a baby. Vincent sat up abruptly, staring at her in wonder. A baby? You're certain? Josephine nodded, her eyes searching his face anxiously. Are you pleased? In answer, Vincent gathered her carefully into his arms, mindful of the precious new life she carried. Pleased doesn't begin to describe it, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Oh, Josephine, a baby, our baby. The joy that bloomed across her face mirrored his own. The doctor says it will be a November child, just in time for Thanksgiving. A perfect time for such a blessing, Vincent agreed, his hand moving to rest gently on her still flat stomach. Are you feeling well? No sickness or discomfort? Josephine laughed at his immediate concern. I'm perfectly fine, a little tired in the afternoons, but otherwise well. Vincent pressed his forehead to hers, overwhelmed with gratitude and love. Thank you, he whispered. For what? For this gift. For trusting me enough to build a life with me, for everything. Josephine's eyes shimmered with happy tears as she cupped his face in her hands. Thank you for waiting until I wasn't afraid anymore. As the sun set over Eastwood Ranch, painting the valley in shades of gold and rose, Vincent held his wife close, marveling at the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a mail-order arrangement born of desperation, to a love deeper and stronger than either had dared to hope for. Sometimes, Vincent reflected, the greatest blessings come to those with the patience to wait for them. And as Josephine's lips met his in a kiss full of promise for their future together, he knew that every moment of waiting had been worth it. Their son, William Thomas Eastwood, was born on a crisp November morning just before Thanksgiving, arriving with a lusty cry that Vincent swore could be heard all the way to town. He had his mother's blue eyes and his father's determined chin, and from his very first breath, he was surrounded by love. As Christmas approached, With snow once again blanketing the valley in pristine white, the Eastwood home was filled with a joy that spilled over to everyone who entered. The Jenkins doted on young William as if he were their own grandson. The ranch hands brought whittled toys and awkward but heartfelt congratulations. Mrs. Peterson organized a proper christening that half the county attended. And in the quiet evenings, when the day's visitors had departed and William slept peacefully in his cradle beside their bed, Vincent and Josephine would sit before the fire, marveling at how much their lives had changed in the span of a single year. "Did you ever imagine this?" Josephine asked one such evening, nestled against Vincent's side as they watched the dancing flames. "When you placed that advertisement for a bride, did you picture this life we've built?" Vincent pressed a kiss to her temple, his arm secure around her shoulders. "I hoped for companionship," he admitted. "For someone to share the ranch with, to end the loneliness. But this you, William, this happiness, no, I never dared imagine something so perfect." Josephine smiled, turning her face up to his. "And to think I almost didn't answer your advertisement. I was so afraid then, so certain I could never trust a man again." "And now?" Vincent asked, though he knew the answer. Josephine's response was to rise on tiptoe and kiss him, a kiss full of love and trust and promise. "Now," she whispered against his lips, "I'm exactly where I belong. With the man who waited patiently until I wasn't afraid anymore." Outside, snow continued to fall, soft and silent in the winter night, blanketing Eastwood Ranch in pristine white. But inside, the warmth of love kept the cold at bay as a family built against all odds slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that their journey together was just beginning.